"Don't sign that, ma'am. That man is lying." The words came from somewhere below his elbow. Raymond Kowalski had been practicing law for 31 years. He had stood in front of juries, argued before appellate courts, survived 2 bar complaints and 1 very public divorce. He was not, by any reasonable measure, a man who startled easily. But when he looked down and saw the source of those words, a girl couldn't have been more than 6 years old, wearing a yellow raincoat 2 sizes too big and holding a juice box she hadn't opened, he felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the building's air conditioning. "Excuse me," he said. The girl didn't flinch. She looked straight up at him with the kind of steady, unblinking attention that children sometimes have before the world teaches them. It's rude to stare. Her eyes moved once to the woman sitting in the chair beside her, then back to Raymond. "That man," she said again, lower this time, almost careful, "told someone on the phone that the paper has the wrong number, and she doesn't know." Raymond Kowalski stood very still. The morning had started the way most of his Tuesdays did, badly and early. He had driven himself to the office on Meridian Street because his usual driver, a retired postal worker named Frank, who had been taking him places for 11 years, had called in sick. The receptionist had left a message about a document review running long. There was a cold front moving through Indianapolis, and the sky had the color of old concrete. He was not supposed to be in the lobby of Alderman and Voss at all that morning. He had come only to drop off a signed amendment to a settlement agreement, something his paralegal could have done but hadn't, and he was already thinking about the conference call he had at 10:15 when he passed the row of upholstered chairs near the elevator bank and heard, quite clearly, the sound of a man laughing into a phone in a way that was meant to be quiet. Raymond did not stop walking. He did not look. He was 62 years old, and he had learned many years ago that other people's conversations in lobbies were not his business. What made him slow down? What made him actually pause near the elevator and press the button twice, even though it was already lit, was not the laughter. It was the number. He hadn't meant to hear it. He was not trying to eavesdrop, but the man on the phone had said it at just the wrong moment, in a pocket of lobby silence between the front doors opening and closing, and Raymond heard it the way you hear your own name in a crowded room. 412,000. He had glanced, just briefly. The man was in his late 40s, dark blazer, no tie, sitting forward in the chair with his elbows on his knees and his phone pressed close to his ear. The woman beside him, older, gray-haired, a large canvas tote bag in her lap, was looking at the doors, not listening, or not appearing to listen. And beside the woman in the next chair was the girl in the yellow raincoat. She was looking directly at Raymond. He had taken the elevator up, delivered the amendment, exchanged 2 sentences with the clerk at the front desk, and was back in the lobby 11 minutes later. The man in the dark blazer was still there. So was the woman, so was the girl, and that was when she said it. Raymond looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the man in the dark blazer who had finished his call and was now scrolling on his phone with the relaxed focus of someone who believed he had not been observed. "What's your name?" Raymond asked the girl, keeping his voice level. "Poppy," she said. "Poppy." He crouched down, which was harder than it used to be, and brought himself to her height. "Where is your mom or dad?" "My grandma," Poppy said. She nodded toward the woman with the canvas tote. "She's got a meeting. Does your grandma know you talked to me just now?" Poppy shook her head. "She told me to sit quiet." Raymond looked at the woman. She was in her early 70s, he guessed, the kind of woman who ironed her blouses and kept tissues in her sleeve, and had probably never in her life walked into a room like this one without feeling slightly out of place. Her hands were folded over the canvas tote. She was watching the elevator numbers. He stood up and walked to the reception desk. "Excuse me," he said to the young man behind it, whose name tag read Brett. "The woman in the gray cardigan sitting near the elevator. Do you know what she's here for?" Brett looked up, then toward the chairs. "She has an appointment with Mr. Delacroix, estate and property consultation. Should be going in soon." "Which Delacroix?" "Stuart Delacroix, 2nd floor." Raymond knew the name. Not well, Alderman and Voss was not his firm, but he knew enough. Stuart Delacroix had been practicing for 22 years, had a minor reputation in probate work, and had been the subject of a disciplinary inquiry 8 years ago that had ultimately gone nowhere. Raymond had served on the bar's ethics subcommittee at the time and remembered the file. Mispresentation of asset values in an estate settlement. Inconclusive finding. Case closed. He stood at the desk for a moment. Brett was already looking back at his screen. Raymond turned and walked back toward the chairs. He sat down in the empty seat on the other side of Poppy, one chair removed from the man in the dark blazer, who did not look up. "Poppy," he said quietly, "the thing you heard the man say on his phone, can you tell me what you remember?" She thought about it. She was the kind of child who thought before speaking, which Raymond found at that moment profoundly reassuring. He said the paper has 412, she said, and the real one is more, and she thinks it's the same. She thinks the number on the paper is the right number? Poppy nodded. And you heard him say this to someone on his phone? He was laughing, Poppy said. Like that part bothered her more than the rest. Raymond sat back. He was aware, in the way you become aware of things when you've been in courtrooms for 3 decades, of the man in the dark blazer shifting slightly in his chair, not looking up, just shifting. Raymond took out his own phone and opened a search. Stuart Delacroix, Indianapolis, estate law. He read for 2 minutes. Then he stood up and walked to the woman in the gray cardigan. Ma'am, he said, I apologize for interrupting. My name is Raymond Kowalski. I'm an attorney. I have an office on the 4th floor of this building. That last part was not true. He had an office on Delaware Street, 6 blocks away, but it was close enough to establish that he belonged here. I was wondering if I might ask you something before your appointment. The woman looked up at him. She had the cautious expression of someone who had been warned, at some point in her life, about strangers who approached with helpful intentions. What kind of something? She said. About the document you're here to sign. Her expression didn't change exactly, but something in it became more guarded. I don't know what document you're talking about. You don't have to tell me anything, Raymond said. I just want to ask one question. When you were told the value of the property being transferred, was it in writing or did someone tell you verbally? A long pause. The elevator opened and closed. The man in the dark blazer was very still. It was in the paperwork, the woman said, slowly. They sent it last week. And the number on the paperwork. Did someone confirm that number with you before you came in today? Someone other than the attorney? She looked at him for a long time. Her name, he would learn later, was Eugenia Marsh. She was 73 years old. She had lived in the same house in Broad Ripple for 41 years, a house that had belonged to her late husband's family before it belonged to them, and she had come to this office today because a man she had met twice and trusted. Because, why wouldn't you trust a lawyer? Had told her that the estate transfer was straightforward, and the paperwork was ready, and all she needed to do was sign. No, she said, just him. The man in the dark blazer stood up. I think there's some confusion, he said. His voice was smooth, practiced, the kind of voice that had been useful in certain kinds of rooms. He looked at Raymond with an expression that was not quite hostile but was working toward it. I don't know who you are, but Mrs. Marsh and I have an appointment, and this isn't. I'm Raymond Kowalski, Raymond said. And you are? A pause. I'm a colleague of Mr. Delacroix. What's your name? The man looked at him. Something passed across his face, a calculation, quick and almost invisible. Fenton, he said. Craig Fenton. And your bar number, Craig? The lobby was very quiet. I'm not going to stand here and... Brett, Raymond said without turning around, would you call security, please? What happened next took about 40 minutes, and Raymond was present for all of it. Security came. Then, because Raymond asked Brett to make one additional call, a senior partner named Alderman. Not the founding alderman, who had been dead for 15 years, but his daughter who had taken over the firm and ran it with the precision of someone who had grown up watching what happened when you didn't, came down from the 5th floor in the kind of calm that meant she was furious. Craig Fenton, it turned out, was not a licensed attorney in the state of Indiana. He was a paralegal who had worked for 3 different firms in 5 years and had been let go from the last one for reasons that had not been formally documented. He had been working informally with Stuart Delacroix for 8 months, the exact duration of which would later be the subject of considerable interest to the Indiana Supreme Court Disciplinary Commission. The document Eugenia Marsh had come to sign transferred the property rights to her home, assessed value $487,000, to a holding company $412,000, a difference of $75,000 that would have been invisible to anyone who had not seen or been told the actual assessed figure. The paperwork had been prepared to look like a standard estate simplification. It was not. Raymond sat with Eugenia in a small conference room on the 2nd floor, while someone brought her water and a younger associate explained, carefully and without condescension, what the document had actually said. Poppy sat beside her grandmother and drank her juice box and colored in a small notebook she had produced from somewhere inside the oversized raincoat. At some point, Eugenia looked at Raymond and said, "How did you know?" He thought about saying something modest. He was, by most accounts, a modest man. Instead, he said, "I didn't. Your granddaughter did." Eugenia looked at Poppy. Poppy was coloring a horse. She did not look up. "Poppy," Eugenia said softly. "I heard him," Poppy said, still coloring. He was laughing like it was funny. Eugenia was quiet for a moment. Then she pressed her hand over her mouth, and Raymond looked away to give her a moment, and the associate looked at her notepad, and the room was very still. Raymond left the building at 12:30. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the cold gray air and called his paralegal to check on the 10:15 call, which had apparently gone fine without him. Then he stood there a little longer, not doing anything in particular, just standing. He had been a lawyer for 31 years. He had built a reputation on precision, on reading documents carefully, on noticing what other people missed, on the kind of slow, methodical attention to language that his first supervising partner had described, not entirely as a compliment, as pathological. He was good at his work. He knew he was good at his work. And a 6-year-old girl in a yellow raincoat had seen something in 30 seconds that he almost walked past entirely. He thought about that for a while. 3 weeks later, his assistant handed him an envelope that had been dropped off at the front desk by a woman who had not left her name. Inside was a photograph, a little blurry, taken on a phone of Poppy standing in front of a door. She was wearing the yellow raincoat. She was holding a sign that someone had written for her, in purple marker, the letters large and uneven. "Thank you, Emma Kowalski." Behind her, visible in the background, was a house. An older house, broad ripple style, with a wide porch and a large maple in the front yard that was just beginning to turn. The house was still hers. Raymond put the photograph on his desk. He looked at it for a long time. He had a deposition at 2, a client call at 4, a brief due by Friday that was already running behind. The kind of life where weeks disappeared before you had decided what to do with them, where the days had weight and the years had speed, and the things you almost missed rarely announced themselves as things you almost missed. He thought about the moment in the lobby. The elevator button already lit. The 11 minutes upstairs. The way he had almost kept walking. He thought about a small voice saying, "That man is lying," with the simple certainty of someone who had not yet learned to doubt what she had heard with her own ears. He thought about what it meant that a child had understood, in a way he hadn't, that some things cannot wait for the right moment. That sometimes the right moment is the only moment, and it is already almost gone. Raymond Kowalski was not a sentimental man. He had been told this, affectionately and otherwise, by most of the people who knew him well. But he kept the photograph on his desk for the rest of his career. And on the days when a file was difficult, or a client was impossible, or the work felt like it was grinding against something that would not move, on those days he would sometimes look at it, at the blurry image of a small girl in an oversized yellow raincoat holding a sign in purple letters, and he would remember the small things you almost walk past, the voice you almost don't hear, the moment you almost let go. Those, in the end, are the only things that mattered.